So loud. Welcome to the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, our first time, I think, as far as I know, in the chart room. But I'm so glad you all found us here. I am so happy to serve as watch captain today. Our Ron Young is sailing in Ensenada, and so I get to step in for him and introduce to you our speaker, Shawn Bennett. We're thrilled to have him here. The topic, of course, is tugboats, but I've dug up some interesting things about him, and he is an internationally acclaimed yachtsman. He's won all kinds of races. He has been involved with things maritime for some 30-odd years, and he's been in the industry starting in his Naples Sailboat, which he tells me is very much like the El Toro of my childhood. And he has done a number of things, but he's certainly been involved with the tugboat industry, which is one of the topics for today. He grew up in Long Beach, and he's been, he says, always an avid ocean person as a sailor, a surfer, a diver. And I think that runs in the family, certainly from his father and also his son as well, as I understand. So he has a lot of interesting things to talk about, and it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Shawn Bennett.
Great, thanks so much, Kathy. Well, thanks so much to the Yacht Club and Ron for asking me to come today. To be honest, initially he reached out and wanted me to talk about a match race that Russ Silvestri and I had against each other. And I used one of my old girlfriend's quotes that's not who I'm married to today, luckily. But she came and watched me on some sailboat race years and years ago, and we were talking about it, and she's like, let's get out of here. And I said, well, we're still talking about the race. You want to listen in and hear? She said, there's only one thing more boring than watching you sail. It's listening to you talk about it. So that didn't work out, it's the two of us. So I still have that, scorched in my brain. I said, Ron, I don't know, us up there talking about match racing is probably maybe not all that it's going to be made out to be. So I suggested tugboats, and he said, sure, sounds great. So that's how we're here. So I work for a company, Baydelta Maritime, which so I've been in the tug business now for, like Kathy said, about 15 years, but in the maritime business from start with Sealand Shipping, which is the company, a guy, Malcolm McLean, who invented the container, believe it or not, years and years ago. And so he changed the world. Real quick story there. He one time I had dinner with him and a whole group, and he said, I didn't invent the container to change the world. I was a trucker, and I got tired of getting beat up every time I went in to go pick up pallets, and I said, I'm here to pick up 14 pallets, and they give you 12. And if you wanted to complain, there was a nice man around the building with a baseball bat that would adjust your thinking to realize that you have 14 pallets. And then you end up paying for them. So that was that. He said a locked box would be a much better idea where, wherever country it comes from, it's all locked up and ready to go. So, go by my introduction. So the history of our company, Baydelta has been in San Francisco Bay offering its services since the 1950s. A gentleman named Captain Jack Frost, believe it or not, it's his real name, and started the company, and he was a bar pilot, or one of the pilots that I think that did a Wednesday Yachtsman Luncheon not too long ago here. But he was one of those members and also had a tug company. Eventually they figured out that the pilots were buying tugs and appointing them on their vessels, and so that was a conflict of interest that was eradicated from the Corruption Act, I think. So they stopped doing that, and then three gentlemen that were pilots, son-in-law, bought the company and continued to grow it. So, but I came over as a general manager for the company in 2009, and the three gentlemen that owned it prior to me were looking for retirement plans, and I guess I was it. So I did a management buyout in 2011, and have since owned the company, and we grew it to LA. So we've had some good success. It's a small company. We have only 8 of us in the office and about 50 mariners on the water and the various tugs. So running 6 tugboats now. Primarily what tugboats do, I think everybody understands is used to seeing what is a traditional tugboat, job, an assist we call it. So that's really just what you see when you see a ship or tugboat pushing a ship into the pier. So they, 2 tugs, 3 tugs, 4 tugs, whatever it takes, depending on the size of the ship. We'll often spin a ship. You'll see it in the estuary quite often, and then basically push the ship to the pier side until the lines are made up. Right? That's an assist. That's what's, I think, every children's book that you look at a tugboat. That's kind of what it's doing, right? But here in the Bay and in California, we have another primary role that we play, and that's called escort. So you'll see that at times, ships coming underneath the Golden Gate Bridge where a tug looks like a tug's following them, but we're tethered. And so we're basically have a lineup between us and the stern of the tanker. In that capacity, that job is to prevent any kind of collisions, groundings, if their rudder fails, if their engine fails. So that's a statute that's required for any ship that has a certain amount of petroleum, and I'll go through that in a little bit. But it literally is 5,000 long tons of petroleum product on board as cargo. You need a tug escort. And that's been in place since 1990 after Exxon Valdez happened. It's a regulation called OPA 90 required that. But what's interesting is the line that we use is a Samson product, which is actually quite similar to what we all sail with today. You know, you'll have a small piece of Spectra. It's what we call it is plasma. It's the same material, but it's about 8 inches around. I should have brought one chunk of it today, but it's 1.5 million pound working load, and so it's quite a piece of equipment. Used to use wire, 2.5 inch wire, and that's now all, much like the transition that racing sailboats when we all had, wire halyards and that kind of stuff. How awful that was. Well, imagine a 2.5 inch version of that. That getting replaced with soft line has saved a lot of backs over the years, and saved a lot of ships over the years. So it's been a great technological change. So I got a couple photos. Photos are probably more interesting than me, so I'm going to try to incorporate some photos and videos into this. This is just us doing assist, right? That's what I described initially. And this is an example of the escort that I was just talking about. So, again, right after the pilot gets on board the vessel at the pilot station out there, I don't know if you've ever flown out of here and you kind of look, you'll see a pilot vessel out there basically doing circles, right? So there's a pilot vessel out past Mile Rock out there that our pilots are on board. So as the ship comes inbound, a pilot will go up the Jacob's ladder, get in the wheelhouse of the ship, and then as soon as the tug comes on station, their communications with the tug starts. So essentially for us, we are the tool for the pilot. He starts directing what we do, we start communicating with him, and all things tugboat becomes basically at the command of the pilot in that sense. And quite often our tug captains then transition into becoming pilots after we get them for about 12 years, basically, once they started operating our vessels. The escort, so this is kind of an interesting thing. This is an Indirect, a photo of an Indirect, and I also can show you a video that is associated with this. But this is how we stop a ship. So you'd think potentially we're tethered to the back of a vessel, and when we're required to stop or redirect the motion of a vessel, that we would just throw it in reverse, right? That's not the case. So what happens is this vessel has a 19-foot keel. That it's a full keel, what you would think of like a Don's Cal 40, maybe a little longer, and it draws 19 feet. And the propellers are essentially at that same level of 19 feet under the water, right? So what happens is the ship will turn more than 90 degrees. So obviously you can see the line here, and it's steeper than a 90-degree angle coming off the vessel. So essentially the vessel will power towards and out of the line, and then big drag sideways, the tug. And that's how we can stop and redirect a ship within, a lot of times, their own length. And so it's and I have a video, if I can get up, that's us practicing this maneuver and actually swinging a ship around. The pilots will have us, test it. Let's see if I can find that. No, that's the photo. I don't think there's any sound here, but this is a tanker that came off the Richmond Long Wharf, so you can see right next to Alcatraz. So sometimes the pilots will say, hey, do you guys want to practice an Indirect? So you'll see that's the side of the tug. It starts to go underwater as they're doing this Indirect and be dragged sideways, essentially. So as you can see, power and stability are really absolutely crucial for us to do what we're able to do. And so if you saw, we were the ship, you know, timing wise, you can look as this video plays out. You can see now how much we've turned the vessel by Angel Island already within that time frame. And so this is a fully loaded tanker that we're doing this practice with, actually an Exxon tanker. And so we'll do this, I don't know, 4 or 5 times a year, especially if we have a new tug captain. So again, now look at how much the ship has already rotated. I think they started this iteration at 8 knots, which is a pretty normal good speed where the vessel will be going. And then now look how much. Now the ship vessel's almost turned right up into Raccoon Straits. This is usually when Pam Healy calls me and says, hey, there's a ship, if you know Pam. Shawn, there's a ship. All of a sudden it's pointing at my house. What's going on? Can you look out your window? She's sort of my eyes and ears in Raccoon Straits in that part. And she gets concerned, and I get a phone call. And I'm like, no, it's okay, Pam. It's my tug. They're practicing. I'll call them if it makes you feel better. Why would they flip them around like that? And as you get further up, it's Tom Purdy that calls if something's going on in Raccoon Straits and asks me a question. So I get, but you can see we flipped the vessel completely around there almost within just a few minutes. Look at that. I'm going back to this thing. So other operations that we have in the bay here, other than the 2 primary ones I described, our dead ship tows are inclusive of that. So this was obviously the USS Iowa. I don't know if everybody knows, but she's down in San Pedro now, but came out of the Ready Reserve Fleet here. So we got to tow her down from the Ready Reserve Fleet into Richmond, where she got prepped for a tow down the coast. So, you know, if there's ever a small childhood boy dream, you know, tugboats and battleships, we did a tow survey. Of course, I told the tow surveyor that I absolutely needed to get on the ship and check it out for myself. But one sort of side story here is, it turns out if you get down into the anywhere in this vessel, there's no cell coverage, and I decided to walk around a little bit while we were doing the tow. We had a riding crew on the ship. We had outhouses put on the vessel because it's a dead ship. There was no operating heads or anything. So I decided it'd be fun to just take a poke around. And there's no lights, so I've got my camera phone on, and I had a little flashlight. Went walking around through the ship just to check things out, and soon I realized I didn't really know where I was and how to get back. And I thought, okay, no problem. I better call somebody. And I realized the walls on this vessel are literally this thick, solid steel. I mean, it's like, you look at, 18-inch solid steel. John would know, and our Navy expert would be good. When we're down racing in San Diego, I get all the information on the Navy I need to know from John. So that's good. Yeah, literally, you could see some where, some dings have happened along the way, probably from, I don't know what John had hit the side of the ship, but you can see that they've taken some fire along the way in its life. But yeah, there's zero cell coverage down there. So I'm walking around thinking, I better figure out how to get out of here. I'm going to die down here. I don't know. Anybody will ever find me. But eventually I did find my way out, but it was about halfway through the tow. And then later when we got to do the tow from Richmond out to the tug that actually did the tow down, I was able to bring my son, who I think was probably about 7 years old, and 2 of his buddies. So he was the coolest kid in class for a while, which was good. So I like this photo just because this is the Delta Audrey, named after my daughter. But this is how we launched the boats. This is up at Whidbey Island. And one thing I want you to look at, if you look just to the right side of that propeller, that's a guy. So, it kind of gives you a sense for the size of the vessel. Everybody sees a tugboat next to a ship and assumes it's a small little vessel. Literally, when you're on one of our boats and a ferry boat goes by, you're looking down at the ferry boat. So it's a really weird relative thing size-wise because, again, you usually see them next to 1,000-foot ships, and everybody assumes it's a cute little vessel. I get that all the time. I love tugboats. They're cute. Well, it's 7,000 horsepower. Cute. No. So I just like this photo. It's a great way. It's really odd how they launch the things. They wait for the tide to come up, roll it down, And then now, actually, with the vessels, they put these inflated balloons around them, basically, to get the vessel to lift off the cradle in a higher tide. You know, what was an ultimate? They can only do it once every few months. The tide's high enough to do it. But, you know, in order to open that up to twice every few months, they added these huge inflatable things to try to, you know, float the vessel off. And I'm thinking, this is weird looking. But so just some fun facts, I guess, and comparisons. Our tugboats weigh 132 metric tons, which, just tried to do some quick math. That's more than the entire J105 fleet here in the bay if you were to weigh them all together. So one of our boats versus right about the same, actually, I think is what the math came out to be. And the tugs have these Caterpillar 3516 engines, which are 3,800 horsepower apiece. So it just depends on, there's some different measurements on horsepowers, but right around 6,500 horsepower, or close to 7,000 for the entire vessel. And again, at 19 feet under the waterline. And I think I already mentioned this, the lines are, I wish I was looking for a sample. Sometimes I like to bring a sample to one of these things for people can pass around just to get the gauge of the size of the line. But so the other thing we end up doing periodically is rescue tows. And we've had a few, actually in the last 3 years we've had more than usual, and I think that's a result of more ships floating around waiting for the supply chain issues to clear. So I think we've done 4 in the last 3 years, one of which was this, the APL, President Eisenhower, which was a shipboard fire. But the crew had been on that vessel in the middle of COVID for over a year. So some of us suspected that maybe they just wanted to get off. And maybe it wasn't an accident and fire. We don't know. But another funny story on the Delphinius was down in Southern California. And we went down and towed that vessel north, and for some reason they wanted to come up with the bay to offload, which was a little odd because it was a long tow. But that was right around, I don't know if you've heard, down in Southern California, there was a lot of news about a vessel that had an anchor drag onto an oil line and start leaking. And so right after that it got announced, our captain thought he'd be funny, and he doctored up a photo of the anchor of this ship as he was towing it that had a big pipeline hanging on it. And sent it around. Next thing I know, I'm getting photos. I got Coast Guard calling me saying, "Is that a real photo?" I'm like, no, please, no, it's not. Like, don't send this stuff around. And the same guy was down in L.A., and we had I don't know if the video is still around, but there was a video of a sailor that we were tethered, as you saw in that photo, similar down in LA, to the back of a tanker. They were anchoring. Some sailboat came along and hit the side of the tanker, started bouncing down their tow line, and he pulled the vessel out of the way and turned both thrusters at the boat and blew it out of the way, where it just started doing circles and water went up down below. And some guy climbs up from down below. It must have woke him up, I guess, he and his dog, and gets up and that video, I said, okay, great. I don't. We video stuff. We've got cameras on board for insurance reasons, for investigation reasons, and all those types of things. So I said, well, whatever you do, just don't share this video, please. And then next thing you know, it's everywhere. And the surfer Kelly Slater commented on it, and there's like 1.7 million views. And I'm like, oh, for God's sakes. But to that, I'll say, so when something like that happens, a lot of times my captains come in and be like, hey, one of those waffies, came between us and the barge today. And I'm like, first off, don't blame me for every sailboat out there. I get screwed either way. If a tug gets in somebody's way, I get a call. If a sailboat, and so just so you guys know, that's what we're called, waffies, and that's a wind-assisted idiot by the tugboat guys. So if you ever see a name on my boat, Waffy, that's where that came from. So they're not always very happy with us, but all right. If you guys are okay, I'm going to play a video of a rescue here if we've got time. Wait, what did I do with it? I think I might have to go onto the internet here. Bear with me. I think it's worth it. Unless this is it. No, I think it's a link here. Do we know if this computer is on the internet? Looks like it. All right. I'm a Mac guy, so. I thought I had it pulled up, but it's gone. Okay, Firefox maybe? Maybe. So this is hopefully of a rescue we've done recently that happened right off here. Peary is the name of my captain, so let's see, hopefully this comes up. You can see, even though I asked them not to post things, how well that goes for me. That's actually not the video I'm looking for, sorry. Same thing, but... that one's on scuttlebutt. This one is the one I'm looking for. So this vessel departed the bay and was heading north and lost power right off of Point Reyes. And I was having a couple over. My wife had invited over for dinner. And then I get a call from the Coast Guard saying, hey, we need you to come to Coast Guard Island for the weekend. So this is from a Coast Guard helicopter going out to see what the situation was. They called and it was blowing about 60 knots. And the captain of the port of the Coast Guard asked me how it was going, and I just got a photo of the anemometer of our tugboat saying 62 knots true. And I said, this is a middle finger from my captain. So they were only about 4 miles off the beach when they lost power, when they eventually ended up getting both anchors down. And the captain of the port obviously was pretty nervous at that time. But we were waiting to actually get the wind to die down to about 40 knots before we attempted to tow. And my captain likes AC/DC, so I guess. So I spent 3 days at the Coast Guard base in the incident command as the incident commander for the towage side, which means you get a lot of pizza and coffee and stuff. So this is the Delta Deanna. You can see she's got a double drum winch with the soft line, a bunch of soft lines pulled out, and then a chain and an anchor. So the chain, I'm sorry, chain and a wire, 2,000 feet of wire. And so what you're going to see happen here in a second is they have a gun that they shoot up in this situation to get a line up. So in slow motion, you can see the swell size. So this is a 120-foot tug. So that's the gun going off in slow-mo here. So you'll see that box back there where the one crew is standing has got toe pins. So there's one individual that's job is to run those toe pins as the chain goes out. So you'll see there's soft line there. Once they get the pennant, the soft line pennant hooked up, that has like a chafing gear on it, they'll get out of the way and get the chain out. So the chain is really for weight, which is interesting, right? There's kind of a rule in towing is the tugboat doesn't tow the ship. The tugboat tows the chain and the chain tows the ship. So if it ever comes taut, then that's a very bad thing to happen in this situation because just the load, the winch and the tug couldn't handle, a downswell type of thing. So you see those two toe pins have gone up with like hydraulic pins. But yeah, I mean the swell size to have this tug bouncing around like that is pretty incredible. We were going through tugs to be on station at night and rotating them into the little harbor at a little, right in there in Drake's Bay to just give them a rest because the guys were getting so beat up. So they have both anchors down. One of the scary things right now is whether the anchors are tangled, because that happens. And then if that happened, our bailout plan was actually to tow the ship backwards into Drake's Bay, and then try to hold her on station until we could get the chains untangled to get the anchors up, because the ship was out of power, right? So it didn't have much power to get the anchors up. And so at some point they were basically going to run completely out of the capability of getting the anchors up. So if we got into Drake's Bay and that was the case, they were just going to blow both anchors off and drop them to the bottom of the bay and come back and get them with a barge later, was the plan. But fortunately, we didn't have to do that. That is a marine sanctuary, so we had to get pre-approval to do that too, which wasn't quite easy. But I think when they saw the option of doing that versus putting the ship on the beach, they got the point. It's a little longer than So one of the things really important is to have a tug that has the double drum winch, because you think about trying to get that chain back on board, you can't spool it around a winch, and then to get the gear on back on board, you use both pieces of equipment to do so. So that's a $3 million winch, but it's worth it in this situation. So all things good right here. We got the ship under tow. You can see, you don't see the tow gear at all because it's well underwater. And again, it's towing the ship, but they're going downwind, so they're going about 10 knots. But this is right where you wouldn't want the tow gear to come tight, right? So in the past, when that's happened, the reason that we make sure that doesn't occur is it can literally rip the back of the tug off, and tugs have sunk within 13 minutes if something like that happens. You can kind of see the distance, how far forward the towing vessel is of the vessel, of the container ship. And any tug they could find. So this poor tug here, this older tug, was actually just minding his own business coming down from Seattle. And when the Coast Guard called me, I got an AS and looked at the weather, and I said, have you guys seen the weather out there? And they're like, yeah. And I said, well, there's this vessel, Richard Foss, that's coming downbound. I see, I think you better turn her around because it's going to be a while before we get out there. And I could hear him on the radio, Richard Foss, we're going to have to ask you to turn around. We had a ship. And the guy, many explicit, wasn't very happy about it. He goes, have you seen the waves out here? We can't turn around. And the Coast Guard said, you're going to have to. And the guy was like, oh. He started yelling and screaming. I could hear on the radio. I'm thinking, he didn't sound very happy. He's like, yeah, the Coast Guard's like, yeah, he's not going to like you when he finds out you did that to him. So, all things good. Captain Laporte was really happy that we successfully performed that rescue. The governor called the incident command. There was about 150 of us in the room. Kill this thing. Where'd it go? I can hear it. There it is. Sorry. Okay. I was going to try to hook up my computer. So during that rescue, there was about 150 people involved in the rescue that was in the room. And, there was one of us working on the tugs. And so my question was a lot of times, what is everybody else doing here in this incident command? But there's the Marin County Sheriff was involved. I mean, the governor's office was there. Fish and Game was involved, and Osper was involved, and, actually Carb was there. All these government officials are in this room for 3 days as we're doing all of this. And they go through, the governor calls and wants to talk to the captain of the port, who is Captain Lamb, was a great guy. Congratulate him on the rescue, and they're going through, and he's like, I'd like to thank the Marin County Sheriffs. I'd like to thank down the line, and finally, then, then we'd like to thank the tugboats. What did anybody else do? So we're kind of under the radar, which is okay, in some ways, and we like it that way. But the port captain of the port, so the same weekend this is going on, we're there, and it's quick story. They have a cafeteria there, and there's a ATM machine there to get some cash. I didn't have any cash. I'm like, okay, try to get in line to get lunch. It's $5. So they said, well, there's an ATM machine. So I go over, and you do a quick cash. It gives you $5. I'm like, what ATM gives you $5? So it was like a $2 to get $5 my bank charged me, right? So I get back in line to get my lunch, and they're like, oh, are you with the Coast Guard? I said, no, I'm with the tug company. And it's like $6. God damn it. So the captain of the port was standing right there, and he's like, I got you for the buck. Don't worry. He's like, so we go sit down and start eating our Coast Guard food. And I get a call, or actually get a text from one of my tugs. There's actually a fire going on right then up in Benicia where they have a coke dock there, which is a product that comes in for the refinery. And they caught on fire, and it was fire alive. And one of my tugs is squirting water on the thing, which isn't really doing much, but it looks good. And I look over to the captain of the port, and I go, hey, have you seen this? And he's like, what's going on? I go, this is going on right now. And he just puts his head down in his hands. Because the one job the captain of the port does, they have a stint here, and they're, all they hope for is nothing bad to happen while they're here, and then they get moved on to Washington or wherever they go from here. But they're just all like, please don't let something bad happen. So I'm like, poor Captain Lamb was having a bad weekend, but got through it all. So that's really all the formal presentation I have. I think time for questions. Okay. Before questions come up, I do have to let everybody know that I'm not allowed to talk about the bridge in Baltimore. I'm on the P&I Club, which is our insurance company executive committee, and the lawyers sent a thing out right after that happened. So I can talk about what we do, how we, what do we do in our harbors, what we do in our ports, what we do going through bridges, everything like that. But I can't explicitly speak about that. So I think this is the Q&A area.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you, Shawn. No, the questioners, we got a room full of questioners. That was really interesting. So we're not going to talk about Maryland.
Sorry.
So what do we do here to protect our bridges? What could possibly go wrong with ships and bridges, and what do we do to protect them?
Yeah, there's a lot that goes on. So the vessels all switch to clean diesel when they come in, ultra-low sulfur diesel, away from what's called bunker fuel. So periodically we'll see propulsion issues with that when they're doing that change, right? And the vessel will report that to the Coast Guard. And if the Coast Guard is concerned, they will do what's called a non-petroleum escort or captain of the port order escort. So tugs will go out and tether to the back of those ships, even though they're not tankers and not obligated to do under that regulation. Captain of the port order will put an escort hold on the vessel. We'll escort the vessel to anchorage. Once the Coast Guard is satisfied that whatever the issue was is taken care of, they'll lift that order, and they might require tugs outbound or they might not. But there was actually the captain of the port and the head of the Marine Exchange here were on I guess it was KQED interviewed him just a few weeks ago and kind of went into depth on that conversation about what happens. And so in addition to that, there are some area AORs of risk, they call it basically areas of risk, AORs, and some of those designated areas could potentially be, areas that they might increase escort requirements in the future here in the Bay. but I don't know. And I don't know anything about the bridges other than we take ships through them.
So whose job is it to monitor the ships coming close to bridges? I mean, is there one watchdog agency, or is it a variety of people and agencies who would signal an alarm or concern?
Yeah, not necessarily like coming close to bridges, but there's two organizations here. There's the SF Marine Exchange, and it's actually coming on their 175th anniversary. The oldest company in the state is the Marine Exchange here in San Francisco, and they are a clearinghouse for vessels. So that as a vessel comes in, they'll report into the Marine Exchange, and all their information. We get data from them about what size. So like we'll get information about how much our tug can pull on their bollards, right? That we get strength numbers from that, because the tugs are so strong, they've got the capabilities for some ships to rip the bollard off the side of it. So our captain has to know, what they're doing. So Marine Exchange provides a lot of that through ship agents. And then once the vessel reports in a VTS, which is Vessel Traffic Services, it's a Coast Guard. So it's actually different port to port. Here in the Bay, VTS is run by the U.S. Coast Guard. That's a little bit like air traffic control, basically for ships. So not necessarily monitoring. And then the escort requirements are monitored by the Marine Exchange on behalf of OSPR. OSPR is a part of Fish and Game, not to get too boring and detailed on this, but Fish and Game is the government entity that's responsible for monitoring the escort requirements. So if it's a tanker and they violate that, they'll get a fine from Fish and Game, just like you get a fine if you catch too many fish.
So that's interesting. I was thinking, what was Fish and Game doing in the room anyway with 150 people? Now
yeah. So it's interesting. They're sort of involved. They do. They have if you ever look at a tide book, right? If you go get a tide book from the pilots, there's a matrix in there about size of ships and tug requirements, and it's a KIPS rating, which is braking force. And so you'll have to, if you're doing an escort, how much current, what zone you're going to in the bay based off of risk, it will tell you how big of a tugboat you need to do your escort. And so it's a KIP rating, they call it, which is essentially a braking force measurement.
So every single vessel that comes through the Golden Gate has to report?
Yes.
And then they're in charge, so they know every boat that's come through the Golden Gate, but then what about the ones that just are local? You're not really required to be part of that.
So like the fishing vessels or like the ferries. Yeah, so ferries, if you ever turn on channel 13 on your channel 13 or 15 on your VHF, you'll hear that traffic. And that's VTS, like you'll hear every ferry boat going, hey, VTS, this is the such and such ferry checking in, going between here and there. And VTS will say something that you won't recognize because they'll speak so fast that only the captain operator will understand.
You hope they understand. It kind of sounds like air traffic control, doesn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Is it more complicated than air traffic control?
No, I would say probably less. It's not, it's not as three-dimensional, right? They got one dimension.
One hopes.
Yeah. So I would say it's less complicated and probably slightly less sophisticated, I hope. Based off what I know about VTS and what I don't know about air traffic control, but I fly enough to hope that it's... But no, VTS does a good job of keeping... There are ferry routes that they follow that they're supposed to stick within, and then there's a whole set of guidelines that VTS will follow. So if they do try to monitor all the vessels that are running around. They've got, 6 screens up of all the AIS traffic that's happening, and if some vessel gets out of place, they'll try to reach him right away on the radio and say, hey, what's going on? Or if there's a vessel sitting offshore too close, they'll reach him on the radio and say, hey, what's going on? Why aren't you coming in? And that kind of stuff. So
you can see them in the daytime. So how do they monitor them at night?
Well, so AIS is a system that is automatic identification system. So it's an electronic system. You can get it on your phone if you want, but they have a higher resolution version of it at VTS where they can really, like if we ever involved in an incident and I want to really look at a detailed version of it, I can go to VTS and ask for a recording of their AIS, and it gets down to a couple meters of accuracy, basically, of where vessels are and positioning.
So what level of federal and state and local supervision or control are we under in terms of not only tugboats, but just in the bay?
Oh, boy. Well, it sort of depends on what about, right? So for the tugs, first off, I guess, our federal regulatory body is the Coast Guard. And the Coast Guard leans on what are called vessel classification societies. So if we build a tugboat, somebody's got to look at it, from a naval architecture all the way up to completion and say, yep, that's a tugboat, and it can do the tugboat operations. If we add too much weight up high in our tugboat, we lose what's called our stability letter, and we have to go reapply for it and submit naval architectural drawings and say we've added 2,000 pounds of weight up on our stacks, and therefore we need to be and honestly, it can change how our ballast plan is. It can change what our capabilities are, and it could flat out change our ability to be a tugboat at some point.
So it's safe to say all 6 of your tugboats are indeed tugboats at this moment.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so the new ones, like how do they propel? How do they power? I know there's some environmental changes in terms of the fuel or means of propulsion.
So it's, over the last several years, we've been working towards, our purpose in life really is the environmental water protection side, right? So OSPR, the Oil Spill Prevention Act, and all of those federal regulations that exist require a ship to use best achievable technology, is the way it's written, to be able to stop them. But so you've got the water side, environmental side, right? Now bring in CARB on the air side, and they don't care as much about the water side, they care more about the air side. So some of their regulatory requirements may not always align with maybe, if we're looking for the most powerful capability to stop a tug, that's not necessarily the same tug that has least carbon footprint, right? And so we do end up, so there are times I've been in the room and just listened to the two groups sort of argue with each other, and we're the ping pong ball in the middle. But so what ends up happening is a lot of times for us, we'll work with the folks at CARB, try to work with engine manufacturers and the people that are doing all the R&D to try to produce cleaner engines. So our fleet here in the Bay runs 100% what's called Tier 4 engines. Tier 4, and that's an engine that you'll if you ever buy a diesel car in California or a truck, you typically have this DEF or urea tank. That's an emissions injection fluid that goes in and helps clean up the carbon that comes out. So we are striking a balance. There's new regulations that are coming into place. I think on the CARB side, they would love to have all electric tugs, but to be honest, an electric tug runs for 2 hours. We are crewed up we have 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We have 4 people that live aboard the boat. So they're going 24 hours a day. And that's the business model. That's what the ships require of us. And if we were to constrain the tugs down, I mean, to be honest, we looked at, this is coming on 4 years ago, potentially changing fuel from what we run now is called R99. It's renewable diesel, 99% renewable diesel, to a different LNG and alternative fuel source. And that would obligate us to have to fuel every 6 days. And that was enough to just basically break the business model. So it's an interesting quandary we're in at times.
I can imagine. And, as you look at your videos, it's obvious. Wouldn't it be nice to harness the wind and the wave power? Probably not feasible, but you see all that energy right there.
Yeah, for sure.
Going at your tugboats.
We do see ships now adding, these solid sails to the top of them and seeing some efficiencies as I read. Mm-hmm. But I'm not 100% sure for the tugs. It would be a little more difficult, obviously, just our operations and what we do. We're there to add power, and having to rely on wind or at that time, the exact time it's needed, I think is not quite there yet. But eventually I think we'll move into, maybe we do have one vessel down in LA that's a diesel electric hybrid that has electric motors in the back of what are called our Z drives. So if you saw from the photo with the little person, those are Z drives. Those 2 propellers can move independent of each other 365 degrees. So there's essentially 2 joysticks for the operator, and that he or she can rotate those 365 degrees. So I like to say, imagine you're running a rib with 2 twin outboards, and the ability to spin those 365 degrees independent of each other, and trying to figure out how to make the boat do what you want it to do. Well, that's what they do every day, and it has to be instinctual. They can't. I've run the tugs just for fun, in the harbor and stuff, and if you're having to think about what's going on under the water, it's too late. It has to be just walking up a set of steps for you, so to speak. Yeah. So we'll bring in a cadet from Cal Maritime a lot of times, start them off as a cadet, and then rotate him in as a deckhand. Then they go through the engineering group, and then they start to train as a captain. And before they're even running a tug, between point A and point B, it's probably been 5 years, and then maybe 12 years before they're signed off as a full captain is a pretty typical time frame for them.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the training, because that's, how do you find people? Do you have enough people that aspire to be on tugboats, and what kind of hours, what kinds of shifts, what is the life like?
Yeah, it's a challenge. We're fortunate enough to run some bigger boats that have very nice accommodations. Everybody gets their own room. The galley is nicer than my kitchen at home, honestly, and they eat really well. Imagine your huge oven traveling with you everywhere you go. They slow cook.
Better than the Coast Guard?
Yeah. I think so. I don't know. But they do pretty well, and it's pretty comfortable. So we're fortunate enough to have a lot of demand for people that want to come to work for Baydelta. But when I go to our meetings nationally with this organization called AWO that I'm on the board of, and I go, and it's an American Waterways organization, a big topic that always comes up is shortage of workforce. So it is a big issue. There are several maritime academies in the U.S., Cal Maritime being one that's close to here. So the majority of our employees came out of Cal Maritime and come to work for us as cadets, and then they often stick around and go up, and then eventually, often we lose them to the pilots. So
oh no!
It's sort of that's kind of the pipeline, and what it does.
They have to be able to jump, on Jacob's ladder. They got to be able to do that, though.
Yeah.
By the time they get so seasoned, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, if you look at the pilots, there's a lot of gray hair there, but they got to stay fit, and like you said, climb up those ladders. But it's interesting. Sometimes you hear disparaging political positions against the Jones Act, which is a cabotage law that exists in the U.S. that requires that we build our boats in the U.S., that we crew our boats with U.S. merchant marines, and for us, we look at it like, okay, well, right now we've got captains that spend their entire time in the bay or in L.A. and learn the bay inside and out. And then they become the pilots, and they communicate with each other in a language that is not necessarily English or anything else. It's maritime. And if you took that Jones Act requirement away, and we would maybe be bringing crews in from the Philippines and the pilots. So who's going to be the pilots next? So that whole sort of path to becoming a pilot it gets crushed if Jones Act gets crushed. So there's some challenges with it, but it also brings a lot of good things to our safety record here, I think.
So I saw in something you handed me, he handed me his introduction, which I didn't exactly read. He looked shocked. I was on the internet. I thought you were the Yachtsman of the Year last year at the San Francisco Yacht Club. So that's pretty awesome. So what did you do to become the Yachtsman of the Year? What were your accomplishments that impressed them?
I feel like it's maybe more of a lifetime achievement award. I was wondering, the truth of the matter was, I was out of town and my wife was saying, hey, you've got to come back and go to the annual meeting. And they know the story. And I was like, okay, why? It's a nice annual meeting. And she's like, no, you got to go. And then I started getting texts from friends saying, hey, you're coming to the annual meeting, right? I'm like, what is going on? So my wife was actually, my daughter dances ballet, and she was helping with the Nutcracker. And so she wasn't around to, monitor my behavior. So I went down for lunch. Stan Honey was, giving a great speech. If you ever hear that and you want to feel inadequate in life, go listen to Stan Honey for an hour. I'm like, what have I been doing with my life?
We have.
So I was listening to that, and unfortunately a gentleman had a medical thing that happened at that lunch, and so I left and went back and started working on the house, and and my wife comes home, what are you still doing here? And I'm like, I went to the lunch, and she goes, no, you got it. She starts throwing clothes at me to get ready to go down to the annual meeting, and I'm thinking, what is happening? Still not bright enough to figure anything out. And I get down there, and there's a seat, and they go, you gotta sit here. And then still didn't figure it out until I started seeing slides about my childhood. And I'm thinking, like, what is this? This is your life? I don't know. I mean, other than, I don't know. I mean, I've had some success in various races over the years. I can't point to one like last year that would say.
About the match races with Silvestri? Just saying.
Well, we didn't beat him.
You have better ideas for the races?
We threw a spinnaker in the water and lost that one, so I don't know.
Bummer.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm very proud to have that. I've won a great award from this yacht club before, after I won the U.S. Match Racing Championship in 2010. So yeah, both the yacht clubs have been, very nice, and so happy to be in that crowd. There's quite a good crowd of people that have won that award in the past. So,
and they actually
Dawn,
stick
I
around.
think, included.
Just wait till like you get a Nobel Prize and you won't be picking up the phone. You won't believe me hanging up on him. I can just see it now.
I don't think that's going to be a problem.
If anybody wants to join in the conversation and has questions, please, we have a microphone and John Bechtel.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
I was there when you were towing the Iowa. And when you're going out the Richmond Channel, in order to not hit the shoal, you had to make a hard right turn. And I saw the chain come out of the water and make a straight line between your tug and the Iowa. And I wondered, what was that like when you...
So we were hipped up, what they call. So we were one of the tugs that was made up hard fast to the ship. And so actually that's the tug that does the turn. The tug with the chain was eventually the tug that towed the ship down the coast. So they were just kind of riding along. But what you do is you make up hard against. I mean, if you've ever towed a sailboat around with a rib and you've had two choices, tow out front or actually just tie up really hard next to the sailboat, it's kind of the same concept, right? So we'll have several tugs on either side made up hard. And then we had a pilot from our company actually up on the bridge of the ship calling, directions and stuff. Because you got to remember the tug's looking at a big steel wall. They really can't see much of anything in that position, so they are guided. Yeah.
I see a bunch of hands in the air. Paul Heineken, Commodore. Wait, we need to do the microphone because YouTube. Because.
So the question is, how many crews do we have on board the tug? It varies a bit. We're very focused on the oil market. That's not me. And so we have 4 full-time people aboard the vessel. That's 2 captains, so they'll work 6-hour watches, and then a deckhand and an engineer. Some of the tugs, believe it or not, that do really focus on the container business, they'll have as little as 2 people aboard, which is, and they usually aren't running a 24-hour watch. They'll be, so we'll have 4 people aboard for 7 days, and then they change watch. Sometimes actually 2 weeks, so it depends.
Is there a forced retirement age, like on bar pilots?
If we could do the microphone, yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Is there a forced retirement age?
So the question is if there's a forced retirement age for our captains or our crews. There is not, but they are obligated to pass a physical. And so every 5 years, I believe, the Coast Guard requires them to go redo their physical. That includes a vision test, capability, mobility capability, and all that. So once, if you get to the point, which we haven't had this happen in quite some time, actually it was a vision test that obligated the retirement of one of our engineers. Was the last time that had happened. They couldn't really get their physical passed. So, but again, we often have our younger folks at the age of 40 end up being a pilot, or 35 end up being a pilot. So that becomes their problem at that point, trying to figure out when they retire them.
I'm surprised that they're more likely to start on the tugboats and become bar pilots as opposed to the other way around.
Really?
Because doesn't it seem like it's more physical, leaping onto ships and things?
Well, maybe physicality-wise, but yeah, money-wise, it's
okay then.
It's almost like trying to keep a basketball player from going pro.
I hear you.
No, I mean they really do triple their income when they move from us to them.
Compelling.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Questions? Microphone.
Go.
Oh, can you get this back? Just a question about quartz nozzles. Childhood friend's dad did this in New York Harbor, I guess, in the 70s, and he explained some of the tugs had them, some didn't. But he didn't like to use the word effective. He said when a boat had a quartz nozzle, it doubled the horsepower, which made no sense to me. And you try to throw in effective, and he didn't like that word. So I don't know what he meant by that.
For a quart nozzle, you mean?
Quart nozzle.
Yeah.
On a tugboat.
So yeah, I don't necessarily. I'm not a naval architect, so I can't give a great answer to that. But certainly the Z drives have a cowling around, which is essentially a quart nozzle. So this is if you see a propeller that has basically an encasing around, and then a lot of times for like what's a single screw tug, it'll thrust. They'll have flanking rudders on the back of that nozzle that comes out, and so it essentially is thrusting the propulsion to those rudders and helping the maneuverability of what were tugs before Z drives came along. and Voice Schneiders, which is a whole other operation type of propulsion that really isn't used anymore. So I won't go into that detail, but
So it helps a lot.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, it helps from a energy standpoint, from a thrust, directional standpoint, especially if you're thinking about you're using those propellers for steerage, right? And so you want to project that thrust, as concentrated as possible. And so that's what it helps doing. Yeah, that's the best answer I can give. I'm sure a naval architect can go in more detail for you.
Yeah,
Next.
I'd like to know, after this accident in Baltimore, is there any rumors or anything going around that every container ship going under a bridge in San Francisco Bay will need an escort?
So I've heard conversations. I mean, after the Costco Busan happened here, we also heard similar conversations. What did change is actually our on-station position where we meet the container ships after the Costco Busan. We'll meet them right off of Treasure Island rather than on the other side of the bridge, which I could complain about from a money standpoint, but I won't. And but so there has been conversations. Honestly, it would take so many tugboats. It would have to be a phased approach if something like that were to ever happen. We or no one else has the equipment available to provide that service at this point.
On the same vein,
John Harrington has a question. I'll get the mic to you, John.
same vein, why aren't both tugs escorting boats outside the bay?
You mean in the ocean?
Yeah, so taking out. So I see your tugs taking them in from my apartment every day, but I don't see them taking them out.
So if it's a tank ship that has petroleum product on it, it's either empty or in ballast, what we would say, if there's no tug on it, or it's not a petroleum ship. So if there's no tethered tug to it, it doesn't have 5,000 long tons of product left on it. So they'll come in and offload, and then they go in ballast. So even though the ship is still lower in the water, that just means they've replaced their cargo with ballast water. And so if they're going out without a tug, then there's nothing on it.
But it still can present a hazard, right, if they lose power.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there still are those challenges, but it is sort of a risk-benefit thing, right? In terms of whether it's the risk is worth the challenges that. I mean, I think from an air quality standpoint, CARB would tell you we're trying to have no tugs if they could, right? So it's this balance of operation risk profile and trying to meet that. Not my decision, obviously.
But loaded containers that are going outside the gate aren't being.
Container ships are not obligated for tug escorts anywhere. No, just petroleum.
Okay.
Yeah.
Shawn.
Yeah.
So I was amazed at that quick stop maneuver you were showing us. And some of the channels you operate in here are very narrow. How much does the boat go to out of the channel, basically, if you're going to execute a maneuver like that? How much sideways does it go?
Yeah, so it really depends on the speed and size and everything, but it's definitely a consideration because you're right, some of the channels are very narrow, and that's where Rule 13 comes in, where people will say, okay, well, does a commercial vessel have right-of-way over a recreational vessel? Well, the answer is if they're running in a constrained channel, yes, they do. And that's why we always hear at every, skipper's meeting here, you've got to give way to all the commercial traffic because the channels are so narrow that they don't have the working room to get out of your way, right? So that's why we will try to stop, pull back, and just be mindful of the channel. The pilots, before you can become a pilot, I think this is still in place, they give you a blank sheet of paper with a map of the bay, and you've got to fill in all the channel buoys, all the rocks, everything by hand, and you have to have an accuracy within a certain percentage.
Is there ever the risk that you wanted to execute the quick stop and you couldn't because it's such a narrow channel, or would you just run the boat around it?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so is there ever a risk you mean when we're practicing or just anytime?
You had to do it for real.
Yeah, so there is obviously a risk. So we would, it's funny if you talk to some of the older pilots that do the Stockton runs, they'll say we used to put the bow of the ships in the mud to turn them. so
But I have a question about that. If say you could turn that ship in a matter of minutes with your maneuver.
Yeah.
What if you weren't there with your lines? How fast could that ship turn without you?
Much slower.
How much value do you add? Gee, what a shock.
I don't know for sure, but I obviously, it's a bigger issue. They can't turn without way, right? They're using a rudder like everything else we do, right? They don't have thrusters, bow thrusters, or the oil ships don't. The cruise ships do, right? This is really the only port that pretty much always requires tugs for the cruise ships because of the current and wind, and you can see the size of that thing, right? So.
Do you have specific tugboats for specific kinds of ships, for cruise ships versus tankers, et cetera?
Yeah,
or does everyone do everything?
Well, so ours kind of do everything, but ours are on the big side, right? So ours are the most powerful ones because we're focused on the oil business more. And because of that law I was talking about before, that is best achievable technology. Before that came out, the tugs were more flat bottom tugs. They didn't have the deep keels that we have, the deep skegs we have, and didn't have the power. So if you were building a tug specifically for doing car ships, you wouldn't need the power that we have, right? The only time that the size is a disadvantage is if you've ever seen, spinning these 1,200-foot container ships in the estuary, sometimes we're only 20 feet from the rocks, right? And so the tugs are spinning them. And so a more compact yet powerful tug might be a more useful tool in that situation.
John Bechtel.
If your tugs have 7,000 horsepower, how many horsepower do the ships have?
It varies quite a bit, but I don't know, John. You know the answer to that on the Navy side? 30,000. Some of you can't tell. The nuclear powered one's one of those. I'm trying to put him on the spot here. Let's let him sweat. No, so I think that the container ships I've heard are at like the 40,000 horsepower, the bigger single engines. And I think that's right, but don't quote me on that.
As long as they're talking about the motors, they operate on fuel, and now we're paying $7 a gallon over in Marin County. How big are the tanks on one of your tugs, and what is it like to pull up to the fuel dock?
I think Don saw me paying this bill once on the way out to the starting line in San Diego, and when I'm paying the bill, we don't fill them up because it's a lot of extra fuel to be carrying around. So the Delta Deanna, the tug that was doing that rescue, holds 123,000 gallons, and with that could go pretty far, towing something here to Asia pretty easily or something like that, right?
Do you get a discount, like a volume discount on the gas?
We do get a discount on fuel, but we're still paying $3.40 a gallon, and when I'm paying our invoices, they're like $120,000 at the fuel station.
I cannot imagine what your insurance goes for.
Ooh.
Ouch.
So we have $1 billion of pollution coverage, and that's obligated to do the work that we do. And you can only get that from one of these 12 clubs that are in existence. So that's a P&I club. In fact, Don, I've been talking a little bit about some folks are saying maybe the racing sailboat group needs to start something similar to this where we all insure ourselves, and we can pick the boats that we think are the best compliant to be in that club. So there's 12 clubs in the world. I'm a part of the American Club, which is in New York. This is an entity that's been around for, 1,000 years out of the Lloyd's of London, that all floating commercial, significant floating commercial traffic is a part of one of these clubs. So I can say, like with the incident that happened in Baltimore, we will be sharing that expense. The Costa Concordia, I got a bill for 5 years later, but you can imagine it's dispersed across every vessel in the world, right? So for us, it's a few $1,000s when something like that happens. But there's a lot of zeros behind what we pay for insurance.
Indeed. Well, that's not a cheering note on which to end, but I would certainly like, if anybody else has something more cheerful to say. Otherwise, we'll close out. I'm thrilled that you were able to spend time with us and give us an insight into your world of, we didn't hear enough about sailing and match racing, but about the tugboats, we always see them, and I've often wondered just what's going on. And I'm also so proud of you for the San Francisco Yacht Club Yachtsman of the Year. That's a big deal. So we're honored that you're here. You've certainly enlightened us on a lot of things, and thank you for joining us at the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon. Thank you, Shawn Bennett.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it.
Oh, you gotta read it.
This has been a presentation of the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon.